Good morning, and welcome to today's story, a touching, humane, and educational tale.
When 18-year-old Maddie Cole was left behind in a dying New Mexico town with a dead pickup, a locked-up water tower, and the last cruel words of her stepfather still ringing in her ears, nobody imagined that the quiet girl everyone overlooked would become the one person the whole town would someday need to survive. This story will show how rejection can sharpen courage, how grief can become purpose, and how the people others dismiss are often the first to notice the answer. Everyone else was too tired, too bitter, or too afraid to see. By the time Ray Cole threw the last cardboard box into the back of the truck, the wind had already started to carry dust across the yard. Not enough for a storm, just enough to make everything look tired. The fence leaned, the porch sagged. The little patch of gravel beside the trailer looked sun-bleached and brittle, like it had given up months ago. Maddie stood near the steps with her duffel bag at her feet and her mother's old metal toolbox in her hand. Ray didn't look at her when he slammed the tailgate. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, like the town had already disappeared in his mind. "I told you," he said, jaw tight, one hand on the driver's door. "There's nothing here anymore." Maddie swallowed, but the lump in her throat didn't move. The heat was dry enough to crack paint, dry enough to sting her nose, dry enough to make a person feel as if even their tears would evaporate before they hit the ground. "You got room for everything else," she said quietly. Ray let out a humorless breath. "That's not the same." It was the kind of answer that didn't answer anything. Maddie looked at the truck bed. Boxes, a rolled mattress, a cooler, 2 gas cans, the faded lamp her mother used to keep by the couch. Ray had found room for all of it. Just not for her. A month earlier, maybe she would have begged. A week earlier, maybe she would have yelled. But grief had a strange way of hollowing a person out. Since her mother died, Maddie had learned that some pain didn't come like thunder. It came like drought, slow, quiet, relentless, draining everything green inside you until you barely recognized yourself. Ray finally looked at her then. His face was red from heat and frustration, his shirt dark at the collar with sweat. "If you want to stay in this town and die with it," he said, "that's your choice." Then he got in the truck. Maddie didn't move, didn't wave, didn't call after him. The engine turned over rough, coughed once, then caught. A few seconds later, the truck rolled away down the pale road, past the shuttered bait shop, past the closed diner, past the church with the sun-faded sign out front. And just like that, she was alone. Not the kind of alone people talk about when they mean peace and quiet. The real kind. The kind that presses against your ribs. The kind that makes every sound around you feel too big. A screen door banging somewhere down the block. A dog barking once, then going silent. The rattle of loose tin on a roof. Maddie stood in the yard until the truck disappeared. Only then did she let herself sit down on the porch steps. The toolbox rested against her knee. Her mother had used it for everything. Loose cabinet hinges, school radiator panels, the old swamp cooler behind the gym. In a town like Mercy Ridge, New Mexico, people who knew how to fix things mattered. At least they used to. Maddie brushed her thumb over the scratched lid. For a second, she could still picture her mother's hands. Strong hands, capable hands, grease on the knuckles, a pencil tucked behind one ear, a half smile whenever something broken finally started working again. "Everything's got a second use," her mother used to say. "Sometimes you just gotta look at it different." Maddie closed her eyes. That voice hit harder now than Ray's ever had. Because love, once it was gone, echoed longer than cruelty. By late afternoon, the heat turned mean. The trailer felt like an oven, so Maddie grabbed a canteen, wiped her face with her sleeve, and started walking. Mercy Ridge was the kind of town people forgot on purpose, a place you passed through on the way to somewhere else. The laundromat windows were boarded up. The gas station still ran, barely. The elementary school had merged with 2 towns over. Front yards were dotted with rusted bikes, split plastic kiddie pools, and signs that had once promised things would get better. Somewhere, someone was playing country music low through an open garage. Somewhere else, a baby cried. Life was still here, thin, worn down, but still here. Maddie kept walking until she reached the north edge of town, where the land tilted upward into a scrubby hill lined with rock and dry weeds. And there it was, the old water tower. It rose over Mercy Ridge like a ghost the town had stopped believing in. Tall, sunstruck, rust streaking down its legs. The ladder cage bent in one place, the access fence half fallen and patched with wire. Maddie had seen it all her life, but never really looked at it. Not like this. Not after being left behind. Not after hearing her mother's voice in her head. She stepped closer. At the base near the concrete footing, old pipes ran into the ground beneath layers of dust and neglect. One valve wheel was frozen red with rust. Another looked newer than the rest, like somebody had once tried to repair part of it and then given up halfway through. That caught her attention. Maddie crouched and brushed dirt away with her fingers. The metal underneath was warm from the sun, but the line itself, the line had structure, purpose, a history. She followed it with her eyes toward the town below, toward the school, toward the church, toward the little library building with the peeling blue trim. This hadn't just been a tower once. It had been a system, a lifeline. A thought stirred in her then, small at first, unsteady, but real. For the first time since Ray drove away, Maddie felt something other than hurt. Not hope exactly. Hope was too soft a word. This was sharper than that. Curiosity, need, the first spark of a reason to stay standing. She rose slowly, squinting up at the tower against the blazing New Mexico sky. Everybody else in Mercy Ridge saw a dead thing on a dead hill. Maddie wasn't so sure. And as the evening light turned gold over the town below, she stood there with her mother's toolbox hanging from one hand and the silence of the hill around her, staring at that rusted tower like it might be the first thing in a long time that hadn't given up on her yet. The next morning, Maddie came back to the hill before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. In New Mexico, morning could fool you. For about 20 minutes, the air felt almost gentle. The light turned everything soft gold. The rocks looked clean. The weeds looked silver. Even the old water tower seemed less broken in that early light, standing above Mercy Ridge like something stubborn enough to outlast shame. Maddie set her mother's toolbox down in the dirt and studied the fence. Up close, the place looked worse than it had the day before. The chain link was bowed inward. The warning sign had nearly peeled off. One side of the gate hung low, dragging against the ground like a tired shoulder. Still, the tower itself did not look finished. Neglected, yes. Abandoned, yes, but not finished. That difference mattered to Maddie. She slipped through the opening in the fence and walked slowly around the concrete base. The pipes disappearing into the ground were thick, old, and badly weathered, but they were not random scraps. They had been laid with intention. One line ran toward town, another branched off toward a lower concrete structure, half hidden behind brush and dust. A holding tank, maybe, or a pump station. Something important once. Maddie knelt and ran her hand across a valve wheel rough with rust. She could almost hear her mother's voice again. Don't start by asking if it's pretty. Start by asking what it used to do. So that was what she did. What did this place used to do? Who needed it? Where did the water go? And why had everybody decided it was dead? She spent the next 2 hours clearing brush away from the lower structure with a broken rake she found nearby. Lizards darted through the rocks. Sweat gathered at the back of her neck and rolled down her spine. By 9 o'clock, the sun had already turned harsh. Under the dirt and weeds, she found a concrete hatch and the remains of a metal panel box. Most of the paint had blistered away. The hinges were orange with corrosion. But when she pried the panel open with a flathead screwdriver, she found old switches, wiring, and labels so faded she had to lean close to make them out. Main feed, pressure relay, reserve pump. Her heart gave one hard beat. This had not just been a storage tower. This had been an active part of the town's water system. Maybe emergency backup, maybe overflow support, maybe something people only remembered when it failed. She sat back on her heels and looked down toward Mercy Ridge. From up here, the town seemed even smaller. A handful of rooftops, a church steeple, the little gas station by the road, the closed diner with its cracked sign. It looked like the kind of place people gave up on one piece at a time, not all at once. First, the school gets smaller. Then the doctor leaves. Then the hardware store closes. Then a thing breaks, and instead of fixing it, folks just learn to live without it. Until one day, they don't even remember what life was like when it worked. By noon, Maddie's hands were filthy, her jeans dusted white at the knees, and the inside of her mouth tasted like heat and metal. That was when she heard an engine behind her. She turned. A battered pickup from Bennett Fuel and Service was bumping up the hill road. It stopped a few yards away, and Noah Bennett climbed out carrying a paper cup and wearing the same uncertain expression he always seemed to have, like he was never fully convinced the world wanted him in it. He was 19 maybe, with sun-browned skin, a ball cap faded by too many summers, and the kind of quiet face people often mistook for laziness when it was really caution. He looked at the tower, then at Maddie, then at the open panel box. You planning to steal the whole thing, he asked, or just fix it out of spite? Maddie wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. I haven't decided yet. That earned the smallest grin from him. He held out the paper cup. Coffee, it's bad, but it's free. She took it. The coffee was burnt and thin but warm. Thanks. Noah glanced around the site. You serious about this? Maddie looked back at the pipes, the switches, the buried lines stretching downhill into town. I think this used to feed something important. Used to, he said. Yeah. He kicked at the dirt near one of the pipes. Most things around here are used to. The words landed heavier than he probably meant them to. Maddie stared at the tower a moment longer. That doesn't mean they're useless. Noah looked at her then. Really looked. Maybe for the first time. The wind shifted across the hill, carrying dust and the faint smell of gasoline from town below. Finally, he nodded toward the toolbox. What do you need? Maddie blinked. For what? For the part where you either do something very smart or very dumb. He shoved his hands in his pockets. Either way, you're going to need tools. For a second, she didn't answer. It had been a while since anyone asked what she needed without sounding irritated first. There's a shutoff line buried under this side, she said. And I need to know if the lower tank is cracked or just sealed shut. Noah nodded once, already scanning the ground. Okay, it wasn't much. Not a promise. Not a miracle. Just one person staying instead of walking away. But sometimes that was enough to change the air around a thing. Together, they worked through the hottest part of the day. Maddie opened fittings. Noah hauled debris. They found a broken gauge, 2 seized valves, and one section of pipe that looked newer than the rest. Patched badly years ago and never finished right. By late afternoon, Maddie was exhausted. Her shoulders ached. Her palms were sore. And the job in front of her looked bigger now than it had that morning. Not smaller. Still, when she stood and looked out over Mercy Ridge again, the town no longer felt like a graveyard. It felt like a puzzle. A hard one. A stubborn one. But a puzzle all the same. And as the sun dropped low and lit the rusted tower in streaks of copper and fire, Maddie understood something deep in her bones. People in Mercy Ridge had not stopped needing help. They had just stopped believing help was coming. She tightened her grip on the wrench in her hand and looked back at the old system buried beneath dust, silence, and years of neglect. Then she got back to work. By the third day, the tower had started to feel less like an idea and more like a test. Not the kind you took in school. The kind life handed you when you were already tired, already grieving, already one hard push away from giving up. The morning came in pale and brittle. A thin wash of sunlight stretched over Mercy Ridge, but it didn't soften much. The land still looked thirsty. The houses still looked worn down. Even the wind seemed tired of carrying dust from one end of town to the other. Maddie was crouched beside the lower pump structure, one knee in the dirt, trying to loosen a corroded coupling with both hands on a wrench. Her shoulders were tight. Her jaw was tighter. Try rocking it, not forcing it, Noah said from behind her. I am rocking it. No, you're declaring war on it. That got the faintest breath of a laugh out of her, though it vanished almost as soon as it came. Noah had shown up early again, carrying 2 waters, a sack of gas station peanuts, in the same steady, unshowy willingness to help. He wasn't loud about it, didn't act like some hero riding in to save the day. He just stayed, and lately Maddie was starting to understand how rare that was. She shifted her grip, tried again, and this time the coupling gave with a sharp metallic snap that sent her backward into the dirt. There, she muttered. Noah looked down at her, fighting a grin. Elegant. Maddie pushed herself up, brushing dust from her jeans. You want elegant? Go fix a piano. Together, they pulled the section free and exposed more of the line below. Inside, the pipe was caked with mineral buildup and old sediment, but the structure itself was intact. That should have felt like progress. Instead, it made the whole job seem bigger. Because every small success uncovered 3 more problems. A bad seal here, a cracked relay there, a valve somebody had replaced wrong years ago. Mercy Ridge, Maddie was learning, had not broken in one dramatic moment. It had worn down piece by piece, patch by patch, excuse by excuse. Around noon, Sheriff Tom Weller drove up the hill in his county SUV. He got out slow, with one hand resting on his belt, in the kind of expression older men wore when they had already decided something was a bad idea before hearing a word about it. He tipped his sunglasses down and looked from Noah to Maddie to the open panel box. Well, he said, either this is community service or I missed a very strange city council meeting. Maddie stood wiping her hands on a rag. We're not damaging anything. Weller gave the tower a long look. Depends who you ask. It's already damaged, she said. That's not the same as authorize. The words were calm, but they carried weight. Maddie could feel it right away. Not just the warning, the assumption under it, that she was a kid, that she was emotional, that she didn't know the difference between trying and helping. Noah shifted beside her, but stayed quiet. Sheriff Weller stepped closer to the panel and frowned at the wiring. This system's been shut down for years, for good reason. What reason? Maddie asked. He paused, and that pause told her more than the answer would have. Maintenance costs, safety issues, town budget, he said at last. Take your pick. Maddie looked at the buried lines running downhill toward town. You ever wonder if shutting everything down is part of how this place got so bad? Weller studied her for a second. Not kindly, not cruelly either. Just the way people study someone they haven't made up their mind about. Then he sighed. Listen, Maddie, I know you've had a rough month. Folks know that, but grief can make a person latch onto things. He nodded toward the tower. This isn't going to fix what hurts. The words hit harder than he knew, because that was the fear under all of it. Not that she would fail, that he might be right, that none of this would change anything that mattered. After he left, the hill felt quieter than before. Noah bent to pick up the wrench, then handed it back to her. You okay? Maddie stared at the tower. Do I look okay? No, he said. You look mad, which honestly might be more useful. She almost smiled. Almost. But the ache inside her had turned heavier now, pressing against old bruises she had tried not to touch. That evening, after Noah headed back to town, Maddie walked to the library to return a manual she'd found in a dusty back room about rural pump systems and municipal water backups. The building was small, cool and dim, with peeling blue trim around the front desk and a box fan humming in the corner. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks looked up from shelving paperbacks when Maddie came in. Evelyn was in her 60s, soft-spoken, sharp-eyed, and the kind of woman who noticed things without making a performance out of it. You've got that look, she said gently. What the? And that what look? The one people get when they're trying very hard not to fall apart in public. Maddie set the manual down. I'm fine. Mrs. Brooks nodded, the way people do when they know you're lying, but love you enough not to challenge it too fast. After a moment, she said, You know that tower used to keep this town going during dust season. Maddie looked up. Evelyn leaned against the desk. Back when Mercy Ridge had more families, more kids, more reasons to prepare. The old backup system kept water moving to the school, the church, the clinic. Not forever, but long enough to matter. Maddie said nothing. Her throat had tightened, because suddenly the tower was not just rust and pipe and broken switches. It was memory. It was proof that this town had once believed survival was worth planning for. Mrs. Brooks folded her hands. Most towns don't die because they run out of resources first, she said softly. They die because people get used to disappointment. Maddie looked down at her scraped hands, at the dust in the lines of her skin, at the small cuts across her knuckles, then back out the library window toward the hill beyond town. For the first time, what she was doing didn't feel like a lonely girl chasing some impossible fix. It felt like something older, something necessary. And later that night, when the sky turned deep violet over Mercy Ridge and the wind began to rise again, Maddie climbed the hill alone with her mother's toolbox in one hand and a flashlight in the other. She stood beneath the tower, looking up at its dark outline against the stars. Then she whispered the words no one else heard. Okay, not to the town, not to her stepfather, not even to her mother, to herself. Then she opened the toolbox, knelt in the dirt, and kept going. By the end of that week, the wind changed. In Mercy Ridge, people noticed that before they noticed anything else. Not because the sky looked dramatic at first. It didn't. It stayed pale, wide, washed in that harsh New Mexico light that could make even a quiet morning feel exposed. But the air grew restless, drier than usual, sharper. Dust began to move in thin, uneasy ribbons across the road, curling around tires, porch steps, and fence posts like the land itself was trying to warn somebody. Maddie felt it up on the hill before anyone said a word. She was standing inside the lower pump structure with a flashlight between her teeth. One hand braced against the concrete wall, the other tightening a fitting Noah had managed to salvage from an old irrigation unit behind the gas station. Her shirt clung to her back with sweat. Her forearms were streaked with rust and dirt. She looked tired in the way only determined people did. Worn down on the outside, lit up on the inside. Noah was crouched near the panel box, checking a wire connection. "You hear that?" he asked. Maddie stilled. At first, all she heard was the usual creak of old metal and the faint hum of heat rising off stone. Then it came again, a low, distant sound. Not thunder, not traffic, just wind, gathering itself somewhere beyond the ridge. She pulled the flashlight from her mouth. "That's not good." Noah looked toward town below. "It's getting worse faster than they said." They had both heard the forecast that morning from the radio at the station. High winds, dust advisory, limited visibility. The kind of warning people in Mercy Ridge were used to hearing often enough that most of them had learned to shrug first and worry later. But this felt different. By noon, the sky had taken on that strange tan-gray cast that made the whole world look older. The sun dimmed behind a veil of dust. Storefront windows turned dull. The church cross at the center of town looked blurred at the edges. And still, people kept moving through the day the way they always did. Because routine can feel safer than fear. Maddie and Noah worked faster. No more debating. No more second-guessing. They had already found the truth buried inside the system. The tower could still feed emergency lines if the reserve pump was bypassed and the pressure was managed by hand. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't modern, but it could work if everything held. That was the terrifying part. If Noah hauled the old generator into position near the lower structure, his boots dragging in the dirt. "This thing sounds like it died in 2008, he muttered. "It only has to live for one day," Maddie said. He looked at her. "You always this encouraging?" "Only when I'm panicking." That earned a tired grin. It vanished a minute later when the first real gust hit. Dust slammed across the hillside so hard it rattled the metal siding and made both of them turn away. The tower groaned above them, deep and hollow, like some giant thing waking up in pain. Then came the power flicker. Below them, Mercy Ridge blinked. Once, twice. Then whole sections of town went dark. Noah swore under his breath. Maddie was already moving. "Start the generator." He grabbed the cord and yanked. Nothing. Again. A cough. Again. The machine sputtered, groaned, then roared alive with a ragged, angry sound that somehow felt beautiful. Maddie ran to the panel. Her fingers shook, but her mind didn't. Main relay bypassed. Manual feed open. Pressure valve halfway. Line check. The old gauges trembled. One stuck. One jumped. One held. "Come on," she whispered. Below them, the wind was getting vicious now. Dust swallowed the road. A screen door tore loose somewhere in town and banged hard against a wall. Sirens did not sound in Mercy Ridge. There weren't enough systems left for sirens. There was just shouting. Headlights. The scramble of people realizing too late that this storm had teeth. Noah came to her side, breathless. The clinic called the station. They're losing pressure completely. Maddie looked at the final lever. If she opened too fast, they could blow the patch section. Too slow, and the line would never build enough force to matter. Her throat tightened. All week, everyone had treated this like a foolish obsession. A grieving girl with dirt on her face and no place else to put her pain. Now the whole town was leaning toward the same question. Can it work? Maddie wrapped both hands around the lever and pulled. The system shuddered. A deep metallic tremor ran through the floor under her boots. For one awful second, nothing happened. Then somewhere down the line came the sound she had been chasing for days. Movement. Water. Real water rushing through old pipes that had not carried purpose in years. Noah turned toward her so fast he nearly stumbled. You got it." Maddie didn't answer. She was staring at the pressure gauge, willing it to hold. 30 seconds. 45. 1 minute. Still holding. Down in town, a light came on at the clinic. Then another at the church annex. Then through the dust, faint but unmistakable, people began running not away from something, but toward something. Toward the buildings where water was starting to move again. Toward the places that might hold. Maddie stepped outside into the storm and gripped the railing near the tower base. The wind hit her hard enough to sting. Her hair whipped across her face. Dust scraped at her skin. But below, through that roaring brown haze, Mercy Ridge was shifting. Not saved. Not yet. But changing. The town that had learned to live without help was looking uphill now. Looking toward the rusted tower. Looking toward the girl they had almost all overlooked. And as the sky darkened in the middle of the afternoon and the generator thundered behind her, Maddie understood something with sudden, breathtaking clarity. This was no longer about proving anybody wrong. This was about holding the line long enough for frightened people to breathe, drink, gather their children, and believe maybe, just maybe, they were not abandoned after all. She turned back toward the panel, wiped the grit from her eyes, and went inside to keep the pressure steady. Because the storm was only getting worse, and Mercy Ridge was going to need more from her before the night was over. By midnight, the worst of the storm had finally begun to move east. Not gone, not harmless, but no longer pressing its full weight against Mercy Ridge. The wind still howled now and then around the hill, and dust still drifted through the air in long, ghostly veils. But the panic had changed. It had softened. In the clinic, the sinks were running. At the church annex, families were filling jugs, dampening towels, washing dust from children's faces, and passing paper cups from hand to hand like they were something holy. And up on the hill, Maddie Cole stood beside the old panel box with grit on her cheeks, rust on her hands, and exhaustion sitting deep in her bones. She had not slept, had not cried, had not let herself stop. Not while the pressure held. Not while the generator still coughed and rattled and somehow kept going. Noah stepped out beside her and looked down at the town below. "You did it," he said quietly. Maddie shook her head. No, it held. But even as she said it, she knew that was only part of the truth. Because sometimes holding is doing, sometimes staying is saving. And sometimes the difference between collapse and survival is one person refusing to walk away. By morning, the sky over Mercy Ridge had turned a pale, washed-out blue. The storm left everything looking scrubbed and wounded at the same time. Porches were coated in dirt. Windows were streaked brown. Road signs leaned. But the town was still there. People were still there. That mattered. Sheriff Weller came up the hill just after sunrise. He took off his hat when he reached her, and for a second he simply stood there, not speaking, the wind tugging lightly at his shirt. Then he said, "I was wrong? No excuses. No pride. Just the truth, plain and steady." Maddie looked at him, then down at her scraped hands. It would have been easy to savor that moment, easy to let his words settle like a kind of victory. But what she felt was quieter than that, heavier too, because being right had not brought her mother back. Being right had not erased the moment Ray drove away. Being right had not made the hurt disappear. It had only shown her something deeper. That pain could harden a person or deepen them. That same morning, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks came up with a paper sack full of biscuits from the church kitchen and a look in her eyes that said more than praise ever could. "They're talking about restoring the tower," she said. Maddie blinked. "Who is?" "The town." Evelyn smiled softly. "For the first time in a long time, people are talking about fixing something instead of abandoning it." That hit Maddie harder than the sheriff's apology had, because that was the real miracle. Not that the old system worked, but that it changed how people saw themselves. Mercy Ridge had spent years acting like nothing could be saved. Now people were making lists, checking lines, calling county offices, talking about backup storage, repairs, a better emergency plan, maybe even training some of the younger kids in basic maintenance and repair. Hope had not arrived as a speech. It had arrived as work. Later that afternoon, Ray came back. His truck rolled slowly up the hill, coated in dust, looking smaller than Maddie remembered. He got out, shut the door, and stood there awkwardly, like a man who had rehearsed 100 sentences and trusted none of them. "I heard what happened," he said. Maddie said nothing. He looked toward the tower, then back at her. "I left you here. It was not much, but at least it was honest." "Yes," Maddie said. He nodded once, shame written all over his face. "I don't expect you to forgive me today." She studied him for a long moment. Then she answered in the only way that felt true. "Some things don't get fixed by saying sorry. They get fixed by what you do after." Ray lowered his eyes. And for once, he did not argue. He did not defend himself. He just nodded. When he drove away a second time, it felt different. Not like abandonment, not like a wound opening, more like a door closing on something that no longer owned her. By evening, the town below glowed with scattered porch lights and the gentle, ordinary signs of people settling back into life. Maddie stood near the tower rail, looking over Mercy Ridge as the desert sky turned gold. Then amber, then soft blue again. This place had not chosen her, not at first, but somewhere between the dust, the rust, the grief, and the work, she had chosen it. And maybe that was what home really was. Not the place that kept you because it had to. The place you stayed and fought for because something inside you knew it was still worth saving. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been underestimated? Ever been left behind, overlooked, or made to feel like you didn't matter? Only to discover that the very thing people dismissed in you was the thing that made you strong? If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. And if you believe courage, kindness, and quiet resilience still matter in this world? Subscribe to the channel and stay with us for the next story.